Hi, I'm Carrie Tauscher, Arboretum Director with Crown Hill Cemetery and Arboretum, here to talk with you guys today about how to plant a tree for Arbor Day. First things that you do when you're planting a tree is not actually digging the hole. Planting a tree starts with planting. So for us, we always want to plant the right tree in the right place. In our case today, we have a large open space, so we're going with a large canopy tree that has a wide vase-shaped crown to provide some shade over the road here and also create some space in the cemetery. Next step is finding the exact place where you want to plant your tree. In our case, it's going right here, and we've actually marked our spot with a little white flag. The reason we mark it with a white flag is you need to call 811. You call before you dig, and that's so that all underground utilities are located before you dig. You need to call at least 48 hours in advance of planting your tree. So if you're excited about planting a tree for Arbor Day, you need to start planning now and making sure you've got that on your calendar to call 811 before you plant. The next thing is just making sure you have the right tools. When I plant, I make sure I have at least one hard shovel, a gravel spade, a hard rake, maybe a small shovel. One of my favorite tools is a soil knife. Just helps with anything that I have to cut or get out of the way. And if I'm planting larger trees, I do keep like a little mini Pulaski if I need to pull soil away from the trunk if it's in the root ball. So these are kind of my tool sets. Because we're planting a grow bag tree today, I do also have just a utility knife that'll help me get the packaging off this tree. So that's where we're gonna start. Now that I have the sod off, we roughly have a hole sized 1.5 to 2 times the size of the root ball or the container of the tree. We talked about this being a grow bag. Also, I just want to retract. I like to wear safety glasses or at least sunglasses when I'm planting, because sometimes dirt can get flicked up in your face and you look way cooler when you're doing it the safe way. The next thing we need to do is take off our packaging from our tree and find the root flare. If you had a smooth-sided pot, you would probably, like those black ones you get from the retail stores, you would probably squish on them a little bit, roll them, and then gently pull them out horizontally. This is really nice. I can just take a utility knife and slit up the side of my container. Hopefully, yeah. It's like unwrapping a present.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it's probably a good idea to note, you have to be cognizant of the top of your tree the whole time you're doing this. So I'm super lucky, I don't have any obstacles. But if you're planting near a structure, a fence, anything like that, be careful when you're moving your tree around so that you're not breaking branches in the process. This elm is very happy in its container. Not do this as cute as I had hoped. Have this. There's my container off. These grow bags are great because they do prevent a lot of root circling, where the tip of the root hits the pot and kind of follows it. but we still have some. And so I'll be inspecting the roots. So any root that goes around the container like this one, we want to see if we can coax it out of that root ball, or if we need to, we're going to prune it off. So I'm going to do kind of like a fast movie action inspection of this root, and then we'll talk about what I found. Back. This was a beastie. Elms have really fibrous roots. Clearly they grow really nice, big, visible lateral roots. But what we did notice when we took some of the soil off the top, you guys saw me sawing some of the soil off the top, is that there are some stem circling or stem girdling roots. In this case, you can see this little baby root is girdling this big beefy root. So what we're actually gonna do is go old school, and we're just gonna try to pull it out because it's clearly girdling and I'm cutting into that root. There's another one here, so I'm actually gonna just take a hand pruners and clip it off. And there's actually, see, there's two more right here, so I'm just gonna find them and clip them off. This one is above what I'm gonna say is our root flare. It doesn't want to flex back this way and away from the large root, so I am going to clip it off. Same with this guy, he's kind of growing up. I can either, when I'm planting, very intentionally push this little hairy root or fibrous root this way when I'm putting the soil back on, or I could clip it off. I'm personally going to choose to clip it off just because I don't want to risk it. And that way we're not constricting this large root. So I'm checking all the way around. When people talk about planting the tree at soil grade or the root flare at grade, trunk wood has bark and so do roots, but they're very different. And so we're looking for the point where the trunk wood kind of changes color and texture. And a lot of trees' roots are going to be white or orange or yellow. And you can kind of see that on this elm tree, it's kind of in this zone right here. So this is where we're going to put our soil grade so that we're not promoting any roots that could strangle the trunk. And we're going to be really litigious when we're putting this in the hole about making sure all the roots are not crossing, just so they're not strangling themselves first off. We did run into a J root. So this big root did hit the edge of the pot and he dove. And you kind of have two choices. If that root wraps around the container, you're going to want to cut it, and you're going to want to cut it straight so that any new roots grow in the direction of whatever root is left. So in this case, I would cut it here at the little J, so the new little fibrous roots grow out this way. This one dove straight down, and it already has set a new mop of roots, so we're just going to plant this the way it is on this side, but I am going to cut this side. And it's really scary. Cutting roots on a tree before you put it in the ground is super scary, but the result of not root pruning, especially when you're in containers, in the end results in a tree that generally struggles. We also want to note that none of these trees are just going to grow in the ground or go in the ground and be left alone. So these trees get watered and monitored for at least 2 seasons weekly. So they're getting checked on every week, getting water, supplemental water when we're not getting in enough rain. So we're going to be able to see if this tree needs a little extra TLC because we're making a root cut. If you have that same situation in your yard, I just set in an alarm on my phone to check my tree once a week. Water Wednesday is a really good one to try to remember, so that your tree's getting the water and support it needs after you plant it. So I'm going to cut this root. Now that we've established where this tree is going to go in the soil grade, I'm going to lay one rake down. I'm going to measure the ball and dig my hole so that I only have to dig my hole as deep as the root ball of my tree. You don't want to over dig the hole. You don't want to put gravel in the hole. You do not want to add compost or fertilizer or peat moss. None of those things are good for a new baby tree. You want the tree to get used to the soil that it's going to grow in for the rest of its life, and that means not amending the soil in the hole. So I'm going to do all those things on fast forward, and if people have questions, they're more than welcome to put questions in the comments. But right now I've kind of teased out all the large roots. We're going to make one root prune, dig our hole and get her set, and then we'll come back and talk about what's next. So we have the tree in the hole. I've started putting soil back. If you watched the whole time lapse, I stayed on my hands and knees a lot. I like to be able to rearrange the roots. We had a couple that were a little bit longer than the hole was dug. So I actually just took the shovel, opened up a slot and straightened out that root into the ground. That way I don't have to cut it off, which is kind of great. We want to make sure at this point that the tree is straight, both cardinal directions. This tree has a little bit of curve in its trunk. That's totally fine. As the tree gets bigger, as it grows, it's going to straighten itself up. Not in that it will bend its trunk back, but it'll create wood that will make the trunk straight up and down. Reaction wood. So you can see this is a little wobbly still. So I'm going to take my foot and compact the soil around the root ball. And I might have to fill more soil in after I put my first round of water in. And we're also on a little bit of a slope. So what I'm gonna do, because we're on a slope, is I'm gonna get all the mineral soil in my hole. But after that, I'm gonna take the leftover sod clods that I shook the soil off of already, and I'm gonna tip them so that the grass is down right on the edge of the hole to kind of create a little water dam. It's not a lot. You don't want it to be super tall. You don't want to leave a ton of soil on those roots. But you do, or you can use these sod clods to kind of help keep the water in your planting hole for when you're watering with a bucket or a hose. You don't have to. You could use if you have extra soil. A lot of times when I plant, there's not a lot of extra soil, even though you're adding the root ball. So if you do want to do this with a little, 2 to 3 inch berm of soil, you're gonna need to bring some extra to your site to do that with. And it's just for this purpose. So we're gonna work with gravity when we water. See where she goes. I'm gonna try to get this soil to settle a little bit as I'm watering. And we're gonna let that soak into the soil, percolate into the soil, and kind of knock out any air pockets that we might have. While that's happening, I'm making sure the tree isn't shifting too much. She's still a little wiggly, but she feels really sound. She doesn't have a lot of leaves on her yet. So we are not going to use stakes and ties unless we see that the wind is shifting this tree. More often than not, I find that when stakes and ties are used and you're there to monitor it anyway, they're not needed. There are exceptions if your tree's in full leaf and it's very windy, or you have a really exposed site, or if you're planting a conifer in a really exposed site, so one that has needles all year round, they can be a little more susceptible to wind throw. But generally speaking, I find more damage is caused by the stakes and ties being left on the tree longer than they need to do, or need to be. So I try to avoid it whenever possible. I'm gonna finish shaking out these sod clods, If I can use them around my mulch ring to kind of deter the grass, I'm going to do that. If I have too many, I'll take some away and we'll compost them. But in general, other than getting this tree 10 more gallons of water, so 3 5-gallon pails for this size tree at minimum, and mulching, we're pretty well set. There was a little bit of root pruning, a lot of packaging removal. There were no strings or ties or twine on the canopy of the tree, but if those are on your tree, try to get them off before you stand it up in the hole. Makes it a lot harder to reach that stuff if you've already got your tree planted. So try to get those packaging materials off first. And we'll come back. We'll talk a little bit about proper mulching. And if anyone has any questions, next week is Arbor Day. We are gonna have another tree type, a white oak, in bare root form, so they're going to be bare root seedlings. And if you have questions about planting at that time, or right tree, right place questions, I'll be here all week and I can answer your questions here at the waiting station at Crown Hill Cemetery.